The galaxy had never seen anything like this. A strange alien race known as the Xanthari had broadcasted a message across the stars, challenging all species to prove their strength and survival skills. It was the ultimate test, a century-long survival challenge on a planet known for its extreme dangers. A true death world. For 100 years, no species had ever managed to survive on this harsh world. Many had tried, but all had failed. The Xanthari believed that only the most powerful and intelligent species could take on this challenge and succeed. The Xanthari were confident that no one would survive, but they underestimated one thing: humanity. The humans of Earth, known for their resilience and ability to overcome impossible odds, had no fear of the challenge. They had seen and lived through countless battles on their homeworld, facing wars, famine, and natural disasters. Their survival instinct was unmatched. When the call came, they responded without hesitation. The moment the challenge was announced, the leaders of Earth made a decision that would shock the galaxy. A small team of humans volunteered to take on the impossible test. No one expected them to succeed. The Xanthari were watching closely, confident that humanity would fail just like the others. The challenge required them to survive in an environment so brutal that even the strongest species had perished. But the humans were not intimidated. They knew that if they were going to prove themselves, they had to do it fast. The humans prepared for the journey, gathering their most skilled survival experts, soldiers, and scientists. They didn't have much time to get ready. This wasn't going to be a long-term mission. It was a one-way trip. Once they were sent to the planet, they had to survive for 100 years to complete the challenge. Everyone knew the risks, but they were willing to face them. The humans boarded their ships and made their way to the unknown world, each of them thinking about the task ahead. There was no turning back now. As the fleet approached the death world, the crew members couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and fear. The planet looked like a nightmare. The surface was covered in massive, violent storms, with lightning that could split the sky. The landscape was harsh, filled with deserts, jungles, and oceans that seemed to be teeming with dangerous creatures. The planet's atmosphere was toxic, making it impossible to breathe without protective suits. Even from space, it was clear that this was a place that could kill you in an instant. But the humans weren't deterred. They had faced far worse on Earth. They had survived wars, plagues, and the worst nature could throw at them. What was one more challenge compared to everything they had already endured? The Xanthari, meanwhile, watched the humans from afar. They were curious but sure of their success. They believed that the humans would not last long. The Xanthari had designed the challenge to be impossible. No species had ever been able to survive for more than a few years. The planet was so dangerous that it had become a kind of legend. The Xanthari had observed other species attempt the challenge, only to see them fail within months, sometimes even weeks. But humanity, they thought, would be no different. As the human ships entered the atmosphere, the tension in the control rooms was palpable. The crew members knew that they were about to enter the unknown. There was no way to predict what would happen. The only thing they could rely on was their training, their instincts, and their will to survive. This was the moment they had been preparing for. The humans touched down on the planet's surface, and the harsh winds immediately greeted them. The temperature was unbearable, and the air was thick with poisonous gases. The ground was rocky, and the sky was filled with swirling clouds of smoke and ash. The planet felt alive, as if it was trying to kill them. But instead of being afraid, the humans felt a strange sense of determination. They knew that this was just the beginning, and they were ready for whatever came next. The Xanthari's monitors tracked their movements. At first, they were amused. They watched as the humans set up camp and began to explore their new environment. They seemed to be doing well, but it didn't matter. The Xanthari knew that soon enough, the planet's true dangers would show themselves. The humans would be forced to face the real test. The humans were unaware that the Xanthari were watching their every move. They had no idea that the fate of their survival depended on how quickly they could adapt to this planet. With each passing hour, the environment grew more hostile. Strange creatures began to stir in the distance. The planet's dangers were real, and the humans had only just begun to understand what they were up against. The clock was ticking. The humans had no idea how long they would be able to survive, but they were determined to prove the Xanthari wrong. They had always been underestimated. Now was their chance to show the galaxy what they were made of. The challenge had begun, and the humans were ready to face it head-on. The Xanthari were watching, but they would soon learn that they had made a grave mistake. Humanity would not be so easily defeated. The winds howled across the desolate landscape, carrying with them the scent of sulfur and the promise of danger. The humans had barely touched the surface of this hostile planet, but already they could feel the weight of its harshness pressing down on them. The air, thick with poisonous gases, made it hard to breathe, but their suits provided a protective barrier. Their first task was to establish a safe perimeter, a small area where they could set up their camp and begin to get a sense of their surroundings. The ground beneath their boots was rough, with jagged rocks sticking up from the earth, making each step a challenge. The team moved quickly, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Every step felt like a battle against the planet itself, but the humans pushed forward, determined not to let fear take hold. It didn't take long before they encountered the first real danger of the planet, creatures that seemed to emerge from the very shadows themselves. At first, they were little more than flickers of movement in the distance, but then the sounds began. Growls, hisses, and low, rumbling roars filled the air, echoing across the barren landscape. The humans instinctively tightened their grip on their weapons, but they didn't make any sudden movements. The creatures, large and sleek, were stalking them from the edges of their camp, testing their defenses. The team leader, Captain Ryan, gave a quick signal for the squad to remain calm. They knew that their first night would be crucial. They couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not when they had everything to prove. The Xanthari were watching, but more importantly, they were watching themselves. If they failed here, it would be the end of humanity's chance to prove their worth. As nightfall came, the planet seemed to come alive in new, terrifying ways. Strange glowing plants lit up the darkened sky, casting an eerie light on everything around them. The temperature dropped drastically, and the air felt even more suffocating, making every breath a struggle. The humans, however, were not easily discouraged. They huddled around their fire, their eyes constantly scanning the environment for any sign of danger. The wind picked up, creating a cacophony of noise that made it harder to hear the slightest movement. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, there was a strange sense of peace. This was a planet unlike any other they had encountered, and while it was hostile, it was not unbeatable. They had faced challenges on Earth that seemed impossible, but they had survived. This, they knew, was no different. Captain Ryan walked to the edge of the camp, staring out into the darkness. He could feel the weight of the challenge on his shoulders. He wasn't just leading a team of soldiers. He was leading humanity's last hope to prove themselves as a species capable of surviving even the worst the galaxy could throw at them. The Xanthari were expecting them to fail, and the eyes of the galaxy were upon them. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. A part of him couldn't help but wonder if the humans had underestimated the planet's true dangers, but he quickly shook the thought away. There was no room for doubt here. They had been through worse. He turned back to his team, his voice low but determined. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we face the real challenge. As the hours passed and the humans settled into their camp, the planet seemed to grow even more ominous. The sounds of the creatures in the distance grew louder, and the air grew thicker with each passing minute. The team members tried to sleep, but the weight of the unknown kept them awake, their minds racing with thoughts of what tomorrow would bring. Would they survive the night? Would the creatures make their move? Would the planet itself throw something at them that they couldn't possibly fight off? But for now, there was nothing they could do but wait. They had no choice but to face whatever came next, and in the silence of the night, all they could do was pray that they were strong enough to make it through. The Xanthari were waiting, and so were the galaxy's many eyes, but humanity was not about to go down without a fight. The following morning, the sun barely broke through the thick clouds overhead, casting the planet in an eerie gray light. The air was thick with humidity, and the oppressive weight of the atmosphere made each breath feel like an effort. But the humans were already on their feet, preparing for another day on the Deathworld. They moved with purpose, their movements swift and precise, each member of the team knowing their role in the survival effort. The previous night had been restless, with creatures prowling the perimeter of the camp, but they hadn't attacked. Yet, the humans knew it was only a matter of time before the real danger revealed itself. Captain Ryan stood at the center of their camp, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of what was to come. This was no ordinary planet, no ordinary test. Everything about it screamed danger. The landscape was constantly shifting, rocks that seemed to move on their own, the ground cracking open without warning, and the strange creatures that roamed the surface. It was as if the planet itself was alive and determined to get rid of them. Yet there was something more in Ryan's eyes than fear. There was determination. There was no going back now. "Listen up," Ryan called out, his voice cutting through the quiet morning. "Today, we scout for resources. We need food and shelter if we're going to survive the long haul. This isn't just about surviving today. We need to plan for the future. We'll move out in squads. Stay in contact. And remember, keep your eyes open. This world isn't going to give us a chance to relax." The team nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. The moment they'd set foot on the planet, they knew there was no turning back. The Xanthari's challenge wasn't just a test of survival, it was a test of everything they were. If they could prove themselves here, it would send a message to the galaxy. Humanity was not weak, not helpless. They would endure. They would survive. And they would show everyone who the true masters of survival were. The team split into smaller groups, each heading in a different direction. As they moved through the alien terrain, the silence was deafening. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots against the rocky ground and the occasional rustling of the wind. The planet seemed to hum with a quiet, unsettling energy. It was as if the very air was alive, pressing in on them from all sides. They passed through a dense forest of twisted, gnarled trees, their branches reaching out like fingers, brushing against their suits. There was no sign of life, no sign of the creatures that had stalked them the night before. But that didn't mean they were safe. If anything, it only heightened their sense of unease. As they ventured deeper into the forest, they came across something unexpected. A massive crater, its edges jagged and raw, as though something had crashed into the planet from the sky. The team gathered around, examining the strange formation. Something about it felt off. Captain Ryan ordered the team to set up a temporary camp and begin investigating. They had no idea what had caused the crater, but they couldn't afford to ignore it. While a few of the team members began their scans, another squad moved to explore the edge of the crater. It was when they got closer to the bottom that they saw something that made their blood run cold. It wasn't just a natural crater, it was a graveyard. A vast array of bones, scattered across the floor, some of them massive, larger than any animal on Earth. The air felt heavy with the remnants of death. The team paused, their hearts pounding in their chests. Whatever had caused the bones to gather here, it wasn't something they were prepared to face. Captain Ryan's voice broke the silence, his words sharp and commanding. "Get back to camp. Now." The team quickly retreated, their eyes scanning the trees around them. They had no idea what had happened here, but they knew it wasn't something they wanted to become part of. The alien creatures, the dangers lurking in the shadows, they weren't the only threats. This world itself held secrets, and those secrets were already beginning to show themselves. By the time they returned to camp, the mood had shifted. Everyone was on edge. their nerves stretched thin by what they'd just discovered. But there was no time to dwell on the unknown. The team had only one choice: to survive. The challenge from the Xanthari was still looming, and it wasn't going to be an easy feat. As they settled in for the night, their camp felt smaller, more vulnerable, as if the planet itself was closing in on them. The creatures they had seen were still out there, waiting, watching. But now, they had something more to worry about. This planet wasn't just dangerous because of the wildlife. It was dangerous because of its past. Whatever had happened to those bones in the crater, whatever had killed those creatures, was still a mystery. And that mystery was something the humans couldn't afford to ignore. They had come to prove themselves, but the real test was only just beginning. Tomorrow would bring more dangers, more questions, and more challenges. But the humans were ready. They had no choice. They would survive. The days that followed were filled with a relentless struggle to adapt to the brutal conditions of the planet. The humans pushed through each challenge with unwavering resolve, refusing to be beaten by the hostile environment. But the more they explored, the more they began to realize the true scale of the danger they faced. It wasn't just the deadly wildlife or the unpredictable weather patterns. There was something darker at work, something far more insidious than they could have ever imagined. The planet itself seemed to have a life of its own, shifting and changing in ways that defied logic. Strange storms would appear without warning, dark clouds swirling overhead, bringing violent winds and acidic rains that could melt metal in minutes. The ground beneath their feet trembled, cracks appearing as if the planet was trying to swallow them whole. Every step they took felt like a gamble, each moment pregnant with the possibility of disaster. But the worst part was the constant feeling of being watched. They had grown used to the sounds of strange creatures lurking in the shadows. But now, there was something more. It was as if the planet itself was conscious, aware of their presence, and it was working against them. Every movement they made, every decision they took seemed to trigger a response from the world around them. The creatures that stalked them now seemed more organized, more intelligent. They didn't just appear at random anymore. They hunted in packs, and their movements were synchronized, as if they had learned how to track the humans. Captain Ryan had seen the signs. The team had noticed the change in the wildlife's behavior, but it was more than just that. They had been receiving signals, strange electromagnetic pulses, faint but unmistakable. At first, they had chalked it up to the planet's unpredictable atmosphere, but now it was clear. Someone, or something, was communicating with them. But the question was, who, or what, was on the other end? Were these signals from a hostile species, or was there something else at work here? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept across the landscape, the team gathered around the fire. The usual chatter was absent. No one was talking, and the only sound was the crackling of the flames. The weight of the situation hung over them like a storm cloud. The planet had already proven to be an adversary unlike anything they had ever faced. But now, with these strange signals, there was a growing sense of unease among the humans. No one knew what to expect next, and the unknown was always the most terrifying part. Captain Ryan stared into the fire, his face cast in shadow. He had been considering the options for days now. They could continue to push forward, trying to survive and gather resources, hoping to make it out alive. Or they could dig deeper, risk everything, and try to discover what was behind the signals. The latter option carried huge risks, but he knew that there was something important they were missing. Whatever was sending those signals, it had to be connected to the strange happenings on the planet. Maybe it was the key to their survival. As the team members exchanged wary glances, Ryan stood up and addressed them. His voice was firm, but there was a hint of something deeper, something more serious. We've been here long enough. We've seen the dangers, we've survived the night. But we can't keep going in the dark. We need to find the source of these signals. It could be a way out, or it could be our biggest threat yet. But we don't have a choice. We need to know what we're up against. The team didn't hesitate. They were tired, worn down by the constant dangers of the planet, but they trusted Ryan's judgment. They had no way of knowing what they would find, but they had been through too much together to back down now. They prepared their gear, double-checking their weapons and supplies, knowing that they were about to take a huge risk. The next day, they set out in the direction from which the signals had been coming. The terrain was treacherous, more dangerous than anything they had encountered before. Sharp, jagged rocks jutted out of the ground, and the ground itself seemed to shift beneath their feet. The further they traveled, the more the planet seemed to come alive, as if it was trying to drive them back. The air grew thicker, and the temperature fluctuated wildly, from freezing cold to stifling heat within minutes. At last, after what felt like an eternity, they'd reached the source of the signals. Hidden in a valley, obscured by thick fog, was an ancient structure, something that looked almost out of place on the planet. It was massive, made of black stone that seemed to absorb the light around it, and covered in strange markings that none of the humans could understand. The structure seemed to pulse with energy, as if it was alive, waiting for them to approach. As the team moved closer, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Every instinct told them to turn back, but there was no going back now. They had come this far, and there was no way to know what they might uncover. The signals had led them here, and they had to face whatever awaited them inside the mysterious structure. With weapons drawn and their hearts pounding in their chests, they stepped inside. The air inside was cool and damp, and the walls seemed to close in around them. There was no telling what lay ahead, but they knew one thing for sure. They were no longer just surviving the planet's dangers. They were about to uncover its darkest secret. And that secret might just be more terrifying than anything they had imagined. As they ventured deeper into the mysterious structure, the humans couldn't shake the eerie silence that enveloped them. Every footstep echoed off the cold, stone walls, amplifying the tension that hung in the air. The further they moved inside, the more they realized this was no ordinary ruin. This place, ancient and unyielding, had been designed with purpose, and that purpose seemed to be drawing them deeper, as if the structure itself had a will of its own. Captain Ryan led the group, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the dark corridors. The others followed, their footsteps heavy, the weight of uncertainty bearing down on them. Their flashlights flickered as if fighting against the encroaching darkness, casting long shadows on the walls. The markings that had covered the exterior of the structure seemed to pulse faintly now, glowing with an otherworldly energy. They didn't look like anything the team had seen before. Ancient runes, perhaps, or symbols of a forgotten civilization. Whatever they were more than just decoration. They were a warning. But to what? Ryan's mind raced. He had been on many dangerous missions, but this felt different. The air itself felt charged, as if the walls were alive, watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. The further they went, the more oppressive the feeling became. And yet, they pressed on. They had no choice. The signals had drawn them here, and they could feel it in their bones that this was the key to their survival, whether it was a way out of this nightmare or the final grave they would lay in. Suddenly, one of the team members, Lieutenant Parker, paused. He raised his hand, signaling for the others to stop. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. The others immediately froze, straining their ears to listen. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence that had settled over the place. But then they heard it, a low, rumbling sound, deep and guttural, reverberating through the walls. It was like a growl, but not from any animal they knew. Ryan motioned for them to move forward cautiously, his hand on his weapon. The team pressed forward, each step bringing them closer to the source of the noise. They soon reached a vast chamber, far larger than any they had seen inside the structure. The walls here were smooth and polished, almost as if they had been carved from the heart of the planet itself. At the center of the room was a massive stone pedestal, on which rested what appeared to be a control panel. But this wasn't like any technology they had ever seen before. It was ancient, covered in strange symbols and glowing faintly, pulsing with the same energy they had seen earlier. Parker stepped forward cautiously, examining the panel. This is something we can use," he murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "This could be the key to the signals, the thing that's been calling us here." Ryan nodded, but his instincts told him to be wary. Something wasn't right. The growling sound had stopped, but there was an ominous hum now, a vibration that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath their feet. The walls seemed to shake slightly, as if the building itself was alive, reacting to their presence. Ryan's gut twisted in warning. "Be careful," he warned, his voice low and urgent. "We don't know what this place is or what it's capable of." Parker ignored the caution in Ryan's voice, his fingers already tracing the glowing symbols on the panel. His touch was gentle at first, but as his fingers moved over the surface, the symbols began to glow brighter, and the hum in the air grew louder. Something shifted in the room, and the team tensed, ready for whatever might come next. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the stone walls of the chamber groaned, as if they were about to collapse. The lights flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. A loud, mechanical sound echoed through the chamber as massive doors at the far end began to grind open, revealing an impossibly large chamber beyond. "What the hell is that?" Lieutenant Carter muttered, his voice barely audible over the noise. The rest of the team stood frozen, staring in disbelief at what was revealed. Beyond the doors was a vast, alien structure, far more advanced than anything the humans had encountered. The technology inside was beyond their understanding, and yet it was clear that it had been built by beings far more intelligent and capable than any they had ever met. The chamber was filled with colossal machines, all humming with a strange energy, their purpose unclear. And then, from the shadows, they saw it. A figure, or rather, a silhouette, emerging from the depths of the chamber. It was tall and imposing, moving with purpose. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its form shifting as if it were made of smoke. The team immediately raised their weapons, but they weren't sure what to aim at. The figure wasn't human, that much was clear. It had an unnatural, fluid grace, and its eyes glowed with a fierce, intelligent light. The room seemed to close in on them, the walls vibrating with an intense, almost sentient energy. The figure stepped closer, its glowing eyes locked onto Ryan. It opened its mouth, but no words came. Instead, there was a pulse of energy, like a message sent directly to their minds, sharp and clear. "We have been watching you. You are not the first to survive this world, but you will be the last." The words echoed in Ryan's mind, filling him with dread. This wasn't just a test. They had walked straight into the heart of something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting for them. And now, the true trial was about to begin. The air crackled with an unseen tension as the figure before them continued to advance, its eyes glowing with an eerie light that seemed to pierce through the very core of their beings. The humans, already on edge from the strange, unexplainable events unfolding around them, now stood at the precipice of something far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. Captain Ryan's heart pounded in his chest, every instinct telling him that they had made a grave mistake in coming this far. The words the figure had sent into his mind still echoed, reverberating through his skull. "You are not the first to survive this world, but you will be the last." He felt the weight of those words settle heavily on his shoulders. The silence in the chamber was deafening, and the team was paralyzed by the sheer presence of the unknown entity. Even the lights above them flickered in a nervous, unnatural rhythm. Ryan gripped his weapon tighter, his breath shallow as he tried to steady himself. He couldn't let fear take hold. Not now. He had to stay calm, for the sake of the mission, for the sake of his crew. Parker's voice broke the stillness, his tone tinged with fear, but edged with defiance. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his eyes never leaving the glowing figure. "Why are we here?" The figure stopped moving, its shadowy form flickering as if it was being distorted by some unknown force. There was a moment of silence, an eerie pause that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the creature's voice echoed in their minds again. Your survival is an anomaly. It should not have happened. The trials are meant to break those who enter, to ensure only the worthy remain. But you survived. And for that, you are a threat. Ryan's grip tightened on his weapon as his mind raced. The trials. That must have been what they had been unknowingly walking through, the deadly test that had drawn them to this place. A challenge of survival that had already claimed so many before them, and yet they had made it through. But why? Why had they survived when so many others had failed? We did what we had to do, Ryan said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. We didn't choose to come here, but we're here now. And if you think we're just going to roll over, you're wrong. The figure's form flickered again, and for a split second, Ryan thought he saw something shift in its movements, almost like a smile, though he knew it couldn't be. It was a creature beyond comprehension, its motives hidden from human understanding. Yet the words it spoke were clear, chilling. Your survival is a mistake. You have passed the test of endurance, but you will not survive what comes next. This world is not your ally. This place was never meant to be conquered. With that, the figure began to dissolve into the shadows, its form dissipating until it was nothing more than a faint shimmer in the air. The team stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The eerie hum in the chamber seemed to grow louder, vibrating through the floor beneath them. Suddenly, the stone walls began to shift, the very structure of the building groaning under the weight of some unseen force. Ryan didn't wait for any more signs. His instincts screamed at him to move, to act. Get ready, he shouted, his voice ringing out above the growing rumble. We need to get out of here now. But as the words left his mouth, the ground beneath their feet gave way with a deafening crack. The room trembled violently, and the team stumbled, trying to maintain their balance. Ryan's mind raced, but there was no time to think. The entire chamber was collapsing, and they had no idea what kind of force was causing it. It was as though the very building was being torn apart by the power of something beyond their control. The walls cracked, and massive chunks of stone began to fall around them. The team sprinted, their feet pounding the ground as they tried to make their way back to the entrance. But the path had changed. What had once been a series of corridors was now an unrecognizable maze of rubble and twisted metal. The entrance they had come through was nowhere to be seen. Where are we? Parker shouted, his voice tinged with panic as he looked around. We're trapped. Ryan's heart raced. He had led them into this nightmare, and now it felt like there was no way out. The ground shook violently again, and Ryan barely managed to keep his footing as the room continued to collapse around them. They had to find a way out, or they wouldn't survive whatever this place had in store for them. Suddenly, a low, rumbling noise echoed from deep within the crumbling walls. It wasn't just the building shaking. It was something else, something massive. Ryan's eyes widened as the source of the noise became clear. From the shadows, massive, armored figures emerged. They moved like shadows themselves, their forms blending seamlessly into the darkness. They were unlike anything Ryan had seen before, creatures of pure muscle and armor, their eyes glowing this sickly green. These weren't just guardians of the structure. They were the final challenge, the true test. Ryan's mind raced as he assessed the situation. There was no time to second guess. It was fight or die. The team fell into position, weapons raised, ready for the fight of their lives. But even as they prepared, a chilling realization sank in. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a battle for their very existence, and they would need to fight harder than they ever had before if they were to escape with their lives. The battle raged on, the sounds of weapon fire, and the echoes of brutal clashes reverberating through the crumbling chambers. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears, his every sense heightened as the massive armored creatures charged toward them. Their glowing eyes cut through the darkness, a terrifying reminder of the deadly force they were up against. The humans were outmatched in every way, and yet there was no choice but to stand and fight. Ryan's breath came in short, quick bursts, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. Each shot he fired felt like it could be his last. The creatures were relentless, their armor almost impervious to their weapons. For every one they took down, another seemed to take its place, more dangerous and more fierce than the last. There was no end in sight. The humans were running low on ammo, their movements slowing from exhaustion, but still, they fought. They had no other choice. Their survival depended on it. Parker let out a sharp cry, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of the battle. Ryan glanced over, his heart sinking as he saw Parker go down. One of the massive creatures had knocked him aside, sending him crashing into the rubble. Without hesitation, Ryan sprinted toward him, his body moving on pure instinct. He could hear the thundering footsteps of the enemy closing in behind him, but there was no time to think. Parker needed help. Ryan reached him just as the creature raised its weapon to strike again. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. His rifle came up in a blur, the shot echoing in the confined space, striking the creature in its weak spot. It staggered, then collapsed, its body crumpling into a heap. Ryan didn't wait to see if it was truly dead. He grabbed Parker, pulling him to his feet with a force that sent a sharp pain through his muscles. "Get up. We need to move." Parker's face was pale, his breath ragged, but he nodded, accepting Ryan's help. They turned and ran, the sound of footsteps pounding against the ground as they moved through the ever-shifting maze of the crumbling structure. The walls seemed to be closing in on them, the entire place threatening to swallow them whole. But the fight wasn't over. The remaining creatures were closing in, their terrifying forms weaving through the shadows, hunting them down like prey. The humans were barely staying ahead of them, their movements becoming more desperate with every passing second. "We can't keep this up," Tessa gasped, her voice strained as she fought to keep up with the rest of the team. "We're running out of time." Ryan knew she was right. Their strength was fading, their ammo was nearly depleted, and the creatures were only getting closer. It was a matter of time before they were cornered, and there would be no way out. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it now. "There's a door up ahead," he shouted, pointing toward a faint outline in the distance. "We're taking that way." Without waiting for a response, he pushed forward, urging his team to follow him. His heart raced, every second feeling like an eternity as they sprinted toward the door. The creatures weren't far behind, their growls filling the air as they closed the distance. They reached the door, only to find it sealed tight. Panic surged through Ryan as he tried to pry it open, his hands trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. But it wouldn't budge. The creatures were almost upon them, their shadowy figures emerging from the darkness. "Ryan, we're running out of time." Tessa's voice was frantic now, filled with fear. "We can't fight them all." Ryan's mind raced, searching for any solution, anything that could save them. The creatures were closing in fast, and the door wasn't opening. They were trapped. And then, like a spark in the dark, an idea hit him. He glanced over at the console beside the door, noticing the faint glow of a control panel. If he could access it, there might be a way to override the door's lock. But there was no time. The creatures were nearly upon them. Ryan made a snap decision. He dashed toward the control panel, using all the strength he had left to slam his fist against the console. Sparks flew, and the panel flickered. For a brief moment, the world seemed to slow down. The creatures were right behind him now, their presence almost suffocating. But then, with a final, desperate push, the console lit up. The door began to groan, its locks releasing with a sound that felt like a miracle. "Go! Go!" Ryan shouted, turning to face his team. The door was opening, but it wasn't enough. The creatures were almost there, their weapons raised. In that split second, Ryan made a choice. He would buy them the time they needed. He turned to face the oncoming creatures, his weapon still in hand. The others were through the door, running for their lives. But Ryan knew he couldn't make it through with them. He had to hold them off, at least long enough to ensure their escape. His heart hammered in his chest as he faced the creatures, ready to meet his fate. The odds were impossible, but Ryan wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He would fight until the very last breath. Because that was what humans did. They never gave up. And in that moment, with the weight of the universe bearing down on him, Ryan knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over. Not yet.